All right, welcome. Today we are diving into a poetic form that has been around for over 1,500 years, crossing entire continents and adapting into dozens of languages. It's called the Qasida, and getting your head around it might just change the way you think about world literature altogether.
But to really get what the Qasida is all about, we first have to start with a puzzle, a literary mystery that goes all the way back to the ancient world.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. 88 lines, long lines, mind you, and every single one ends with the exact same rhyme. That's not some modern art experiment. This is a real poem from the 7th century. The sheer discipline is just incredible. But the real puzzle isn't just the rhyme, it's what's inside those lines.
And this is where things get a little weird. The poet, a guy named Labid, is jumping all over the place. One minute he's mourning a lost love, then he's describing a wild donkey, and then he's bragging about how great his tribe is. There's no single story holding it all together. To you or me, it can feel totally random. So what on earth is connecting all of these different things?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? How can one poem hold so many different worlds inside of it? Well, the answer is actually in the form itself. To understand the poem, you have to understand the Qasida.
So let's do it. Let's break this thing down. What exactly is a qasida? What are the rules? What's its basic structure?
Okay, so the simplest definition is this. A qasida is a long poem. It started in Arabic at least 1,500 years ago, and its biggest, most obvious feature is that every line uses the exact same rhyme. That's called a monorhyme. But trust me, that's just scratching the surface.
You see, the word qasida can be a little tricky. On the one hand, yeah, it can just mean any long poem with one rhyme. But for literary scholars, and for what we're talking about today, it means something way more specific and, frankly, way cooler. It's a poem built in separate sections or movements, kind of like a symphony.
So these are the essential building blocks. You've got this super rigid frame, the same rhyme, the same rhythm, line after line after line. But inside that strict frame, the poet has complete freedom to jump between different scenes, different ideas, different moods. And that's the secret. It's this mix of strict form and thematic freedom that made the Qasida so powerful and so long-lasting. It was like the perfect container for anything.
Okay, so we've got the basic structure down. But the real story here, the thing that is just mind-blowing, is the sheer scale of the Qasida. This wasn't just some old Arabic form. This was a global phenomenon.
Just let that number sink in for a minute. We're talking about a literary tradition that has been alive and kicking for over 1,500 years. It has outlasted empires, it's survived the invention of the printing press, and it's still around in the digital age. That's some serious staying power.
And you can really see that incredible journey here. It starts in ancient Arabia, becomes this hugely important form across the Islamic world, thrives centuries later in Mughal India, and, get this, it's being revived today on primetime TV. There are these hugely popular poetry competitions, like Millions Poet, where poets are still composing them. It never really went away.
And it wasn't just in Arabic. The form was so influential, so prestigious, that poets adopted it in Persian, Turkish, Urdu, Hebrew, even Swahili and Malay. This isn't just a genre of poetry. It's a massive, multilingual universe of literature.
So to make this huge 1,500-year tradition feel a little more real, let's just zoom in and compare two poems, written 1,200 years and thousands of miles apart.
So on one side, we have Labid, the 7th century Arab poet we started with. On the other, Sheikh Zouk, a famous 19th century Urdu poet from Delhi. We're talking different times, different languages, even different reasons for writing the poem. But look at what they share. Both of them use the imagery of rain and wine as major symbols. Now that is the Qasida tradition at work.
For Labid, our ancient poet, wine is a very personal thing. It's about escaping the pain of a lost love, about going to the tavern to forget his troubles with his friends. It's an escape from sorrow.
But for Zouk, writing 1,200 years later in a totally different world, wine is all about public celebration. It's about seeing the new moon that signals the end of Ramadan, a time for joy and community festivals. So you've got the exact same image, but with a totally different feeling and purpose.
And this is what's so incredible. The fact that these two poets, from completely different centuries and cultures, are drawing from the same bucket of symbols, well, that shows you just how strong this tradition is. The Qasida creates this shared literary language that connects them across time. So you have a form that's ancient, that's incredibly widespread, and hugely significant. You'd think it would be a cornerstone of what we call world literature, and yet, for a lot of people, it's completely invisible. Why is that?
Let's just ask that question point blank. Why does a genre that shaped art and culture across 3 continents for over 1,000 years just fly under the radar for so many of us? Well, the answer might have more to do with us than with the Qasida. It comes down to our own modern biases.
First off, we've got a bias for print. We tend to think that real literary culture only kicked off with the printing press, and we forget about the massive, vibrant cultures that created, copied, and performed literature by hand for centuries. And second, we have a huge bias for narrative. We want a clear story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. We have a tough time with art forms like the Qasida that work through powerful images and themes instead of a straightforward plot.
And probably the most famous Qasida ever written, the Burda, really brings all these challenges home. It's this incredible 13th century poem praising the Prophet Muhammad. It's a masterpiece of the genre, but it's also so much more. For millions of people, it's a sacred text that's believed to have actual healing powers.
And this just completely messes with our modern categories, right? We like to build this neat little wall between secular literature, art for art's sake, and religious texts. But the Burda is both at the same time. It's a world-changing work of art, and it's an object of deep religious devotion. It forces you to ask if that wall we built should even be there in the first place.
So what do we do with all this? Is the Qasida just too different, too strange for modern readers to connect with? Well, the source material we're looking at today suggests the exact opposite.
I absolutely love this idea. Instead of starting with poetry that feels familiar and then working up to something difficult like the Qasida, what if you just flip the script? Maybe it's radical difference, the nonlinear structure, the sheer epic scale of it. Maybe that's the very thing that can spark a totally new love for poetry in general.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. The Qasida is this entire world of literature, a genre that challenges so many of our assumptions, and it makes you wonder, what other incredible masterpieces are we missing out on just because we're only looking for the kinds of stories we already know? Thanks for watching.